The wind whistled through Oak Ridge train station as Emily Williams froze mid-step. There, between two rusted benches, huddled a sight that seized her heart. Two German shepherds, one standing guard over the other. The larger dog's scarred face contorted into a warning growl that died in his throat when his companion whimpered in pain. "They've been here a week now," said a gruff voice. Frank Mitchell, the elderly station caretaker, appeared beside her. "Owner dumped 'em and drove off. Big one won't leave the injured one. Not for food, not for nothing." Emily's eyes locked with the guardian dog's. Behind the fierce protectiveness, she saw something that mirrored her own desperation. A plea. Her phone vibrated. Jason's text glowed on the screen. Adoption agency called. Application denied. Again. Emily looked back at the dogs and made her decision. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Emily Williams had always pictured her life differently. At 35, the elementary school teacher had imagined a house filled with children's laughter, not the hollow echoes that now haunted the home she shared with Jason. The school district's budget cuts had left her unemployed 3 months ago, adding financial strain to the emotional burden of their fourth failed adoption application. Jason worked as a construction foreman, his calloused hands testament to the extra shifts he'd been taking. What few knew was that behind his steady blue eyes lay fragments of missing memories, gaps from an accident years ago that doctors said might never fully return. Still, he built things, fixed what was broken, except for the one thing that mattered most, their chance at parenthood. Frank Mitchell knew something about loss. The 73-year-old Korean War veteran had buried his wife 15 years ago and found purpose in maintaining the barely operational Oak Ridge station. His weathered face rarely smiled, but his eyes still carried the sharp observation skills from his days as the county's top canine police dog trainer. Across the street from the Williams' modest home lived Martha Grayson. At 78, the widow spent most days tending her immaculate garden and keeping careful watch over neighborhood activities. "Dogs bring noise and mess," she'd often declare, though few knew this stemmed from the heartbreak of losing her husband in Vietnam while rescuing a military dog. Dr. Abigail Miller's veterinary clinic was struggling like most businesses in Oak Ridge. Once Emily's mentor during a brief stint at veterinary school, before financial reality forced her to switch to teaching, Abigail now worked 18-hour days just to keep the lights on. Then there was Richard Cooper, a former police officer whose hollow cheeks and haunted eyes spoke of demons that followed him home from the job. People whispered about his sudden retirement after his partner Michael Donovan's death, about the shouting sometimes heard from his apartment. And finally, the dogs. Max, the larger shepherd, bore a jagged scar across his face and moved with the calculated precision of his formal training. Shadow, younger and more severely injured, had the soft eyes of a dog who still believed in human goodness, despite evidence to the contrary. In the economically depressed town of Oak Ridge, where the train now stopped only twice weekly, these lives were about to collide in ways none of them could have anticipated. Emily's hands trembled as she dialed Jason's number, her eyes never leaving the two German shepherds. The smaller one's labored breathing sent panic through her chest, overriding her lifelong fear of dogs. "Jason, I need you at the station. Now," her voice quavered. "There are 2 dogs. One's hurt badly." While waiting, Emily inched closer, surprising herself. The larger dog, Max, she would later learn, bared his teeth at Frank when he approached, but when Emily took another step, something unexpected happened. Max's posture shifted, his eyes softening when they met hers, as though recognizing something kindred in her soul. "I've never seen him let anybody that close," Frank marveled, keeping his distance. "Been trying to feed them for days. He guards that smaller one like it's his only purpose in life." Emily knelt, maintaining a respectful distance. "It's okay," she whispered, her childhood fear battling with newfound resolve. "We want to help." Max's intelligent eyes assessed her, making a calculation only he understood. Frank disappeared into the station's maintenance room, returning with an old tarp. "Could make a stretcher out of this," he suggested, "if he'll let us." Jason's truck screeched into the parking lot 20 minutes later. His work boots pounded against pavement as he rushed toward them, dust from the construction site still clinging to his clothes. "Emily, what?" He stopped abruptly, taking in the scene. Construction had taught Jason to assess structural damage quickly. He immediately recognized the severity of the smaller dog's injuries. "That dog needs emergency care." Together, they fashioned a makeshift stretcher, while Max watched with suspicious vigilance. Remarkably, when Emily approached the injured shepherd, Max stepped aside, a tentative trust granted to her alone. "The nearest emergency vet is 70 miles away," Frank informed them. "But Abigail Miller's clinic is just past the hardware store. She was Army, knows her way around trauma." The drive to the clinic was tense. Jason navigated carefully, while Emily sat in the back, the injured dog's head cradled in her lap. Max sat rigidly beside them, his body pressed against the smaller dog, refusing separation even by inches. Dr. Miller met them at the door, her experienced hands already examining the injured shepherd before they fully entered the clinic. "Get him on the table," she ordered, professional demeanor masking the shock in her eyes. "How long has he been like this?" "Frank said they've been at the station about a week," Jason explained, helping transfer the limp dog to the examination table. Max growled when separated, but didn't interfere, seeming to understand the necessity. Dr. Miller worked methodically, listing injuries aloud. "Internal bleeding, spinal trauma, dehydration, evidence of multiple blunt force impacts." She looked up grimly. "Someone did this deliberately. This wasn't an accident." Emily's hand found Jason's, squeezing tightly. "He needs surgery immediately," Dr. Miller continued. "I'll be honest. His chances aren't great, but we can try." "Do it," Emily said without hesitation. The veterinarian's expression tightened. "The surgery alone will cost around $12,000. The figure hit them like a physical blow. With Emily unemployed and their savings depleted by adoption applications, it might as well have been $1 million. "We'll figure something out," Jason said, though uncertainty clouded his features. "What choice do we have?" While Dr. Miller prepped for surgery, her assistant attempted to examine Max, who refused to cooperate until Emily stepped in, speaking softly until he reluctantly permitted basic care. "He's got a microchip," the assistant announced, scanning Max's shoulder. "He's registered to the Oak Ridge Police Department K-9 unit." This revelation hung in the air as a new complication. "I'll make some calls," Dr. Miller said, her tone suggesting this wasn't her first case of abandoned police dogs. "Meanwhile, you need to decide, the surgery or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Emily and Jason stepped outside to discuss their impossible choice. The financial burden would be crushing, yet the alternative, unthinkable. Their deliberation was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Martha Grayson, who had apparently followed them from the neighborhood. "Frank called me," she explained curtly. "Said you found some trouble at the station." Before either could respond, Martha continued, "That big dog can stay in my garage while the little one's here, just until you sort things out." Her tone brooked no argument. "Can't have him howling all hours in your backyard. Mrs. Thompson's migraines, you know." The offer stunned them into silence. Martha Grayson, who complained about neighborhood children being too loud, was offering to house a distressed German shepherd. Back inside, with the weight of debt looming over them, Emily met Dr. Miller's questioning gaze and nodded. "Save him." Dr. Miller was halfway through preparing Shadow for surgery when her assistant burst through the door, face flushed with excitement. "Doctor, you're not going to believe this. That German shepherd out there, I ran his microchip through the national database. It's Max. The Max." "You'll have to be more specific," Dr. Miller replied, without looking up from her surgical prep. "Max, the hero. The police dog who saved those people in the West Side building collapse 2 years ago. Remember? It was all over the news for weeks. He pulled out 7 people alive after the structure was declared too unstable for rescue teams." Dr. Miller's hands stilled momentarily. "The one that disappeared afterward? Are you certain?" "Positive. The chip confirms it. After the building collapse, he was awarded the Medal of Valor, then vanished during his handler's funeral. The whole city was searching for him." In the waiting room, Emily and Jason sat in stunned silence as Dr. Miller relayed this information. Max, seemingly indifferent to his celebrity status, remained vigilant by the door separating him from Shadow. "We'll need to contact the police department," Dr. Miller explained. "Technically, he's still their property." Jason nodded absently, his mind already calculating how this development might affect their precarious situation. Emily simply stared at Max with newfound wonder. What had this dog endured? How had he ended up abandoned at a train station with a grievously injured companion? Within hours, news of Max's discovery spread through Oak Ridge's grapevine. A local reporter arrived, snapping photos from the parking lot until Frank chased him away. The clinic's phone rang constantly with inquiries from media outlets and former search volunteers. By evening, the Oak Ridge police chief himself appeared, expressing disbelief that their department's most decorated canine officer had resurfaced under such circumstances. He examined Max with a reverential gentleness that the dog tolerated but didn't welcome. "We'll take him back to the station tonight," the chief announced. "Get him checked out properly." Max's response was immediate and unequivocal. He placed himself between the chief and the surgical suite doors, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling from his chest. "I don't think he's going anywhere," Emily observed quietly. The standoff ended with an unusual compromise. Max would remain at the clinic under Emily and Jason's temporary guardianship while Shadow underwent surgery, with the understanding that his ownership status would be resolved afterward. As the chief departed, Frank pulled Emily and Jason aside. "There's something else you should know. When I was closing up the station this afternoon, a man was asking about the dogs. Described them perfectly. Said they belonged to him." Jason's posture stiffened. "Did you get a name?" "Richard Cooper, former police officer. Said he'd be back tomorrow with proof of ownership." The name sent a chill through Emily. What if he's the one who hurt Shadow? The night progressed with agonizing slowness. Shadow's surgery stretched to 4 hours, during which Max refused food and water, his attention fixed unwavering on the surgical suite doors. Emily stayed beside him, sometimes talking softly, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. Just before midnight, Dr. Miller emerged, exhaustion etched in the lines of her face. "He's stable, but critical. The next 48 hours will determine everything." Dawn brought fresh complications. The local news ran a story about Hero Canine Max being found, complete with archive footage of his rescue efforts at the building collapse. Outside the clinic, a small gathering of well-wishers assembled, some bringing dog treats, others holding homemade signs celebrating Max's return. Among them stood a thin man with haunted eyes who watched from across the street. Emily noticed him first, his intensity setting off alarm bells. "That's Richard Cooper," Frank confirmed when he arrived to check on the dogs. "Recognized him from when I worked with the department years back." Inside, Dr. Miller delivered news that cast a pall over the morning's minor victories. Shadow's treatment would cost significantly more than initially estimated. The spinal damage was extensive, requiring specialized care. "I can't afford to provide this treatment for free," she explained apologetically. "The clinic is barely staying afloat as it is." Emily retreated to the bathroom, tears flowing freely once she was alone. When she emerged, she'd made a decision. "I'm selling my grandmother's jewelry," she told Jason. "It should cover at least part of the cost." Jason didn't argue, simply adding, "I'll talk to my boss about an advance and extra shifts." News of their financial predicament somehow spread through town. By afternoon, Martha had organized a collection among her senior friends, arriving with an envelope containing $1,200 in cash, mostly in $5 and $10 bills. "It's not much," she said gruffly. "Fixed incomes, you know. But we've all lost someone we loved. No one should die alone on a train station floor." The community's response was touching, but insufficient. They remained thousands short, with Richard Cooper's claim hanging over them like a guillotine blade. That threat materialized the following morning when Cooper arrived at the clinic with documentation showing he had adopted both dogs from the K9 unit 18 months earlier. "I've been searching everywhere for them," he insisted, though his shifting gaze suggested dishonesty. "They ran away during the thunderstorm." Emily observed the scars on Max's face, Shadow's catastrophic injuries. "They didn't run away," she challenged, finding courage in her protectiveness. "And they certainly weren't injured in an accident." Cooper's expression hardened. "They're my dogs. I have the papers to prove it." The confrontation might have escalated further if Frank hadn't stepped between them, fixing Cooper with a steely gaze. "Funny thing, Richard. I was at the station the day those dogs appeared. Saw someone matching your description drive away in a blue sedan. Left them without water, without food." Cooper blanched visibly. "That's abandonment," Frank continued. "Criminal charges in this county." "You can't prove anything," Cooper snapped, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Security cameras," Frank countered. "New ones. Chief had them installed last month after those vandalism incidents." It was a bluff. The cameras had been broken for years, but Cooper didn't know that. He retreated, promising to return with a lawyer, threats spilling from him like poison. The temporary victory felt hollow as they returned to Shadow's side. The dog's condition remained precarious, his breathing shallow and labored, despite the surgery. "We need a miracle," Dr. Miller admitted, "and about $10,000 more dollars." That evening, a local news station ran a feature on Max's rediscovery and Shadow's plight. They included a donation link for Shadow's medical expenses, though no one expected much from a town where economic hardship was the norm. By midnight, the fund had received $1,375. By dawn, through social media sharing beyond Oak Ridge's borders, it had climbed to $2,830. It wasn't enough, but it was something. And in his kennel, Max finally accepted a small piece of chicken from Emily's hand, the first food he'd taken since their arrival. Shadow's surgery left him weakened but alive, tethered to this world by veterinary science, and perhaps something less tangible: Max's unwavering presence just beyond the recovery room door. For 3 days, the older German shepherd maintained his vigil, accepting minimal food and water only when Emily brought it directly to him, refusing to move more than a few feet from where his companion lay recovering. "I've never seen devotion like this," Dr. Miller commented, observing Max's sentinel-like posture. "Not even in working canine pairs." Emily had taken to sleeping in the waiting room, her presence seemingly the only thing keeping Max from attempting to breach the recovery room door. Jason would arrive each morning before his construction shift, bringing fresh clothes and increasingly worried expressions as their financial situation deteriorated further. On the 4th day, Martha appeared unannounced, carrying a large pot of homemade broth. "My Henry swore by this recipe," she announced, setting it down with authority. "When he came back from Korea, sick as a dog, pardon the expression, this brought him back." She instructed Dr. Miller's assistant on heating it properly before turning her attention to Max. Where others approached with caution, Martha moved with the confidence of someone who had seen too much in life to fear much of anything. "You're too skinny," she informed him matter-of-factly, setting a bowl of the broth before him. "Can't help your friend if you're half dead yourself." To everyone's astonishment, Max examined the offering and began to lap cautiously at the liquid. Martha nodded in satisfaction, as though she'd expected nothing less. Emily found herself with unexpected free time as Dr. Miller offered her part-time work as an assistant, both to help with the dogs and to offset some of the mounting medical costs. Between shifts, she researched Max's history, piecing together news articles and video clips from the West Side building collapse. The details were astonishing. Max had led rescue teams to survivors buried deep in the rubble, navigating spaces too dangerous for human rescuers. When the structure was finally deemed too unstable for continued efforts, Max had somehow slipped away from his handler and returned inside, emerging hours later with a young child, the 7th life he had saved that day. The ceremony awarding him the Medal of Valor had been attended by the mayor, with all 7 survivors present to honor him. Then, just weeks later, news reports documented his disappearance following his handler's funeral, with heartbroken updates as the search gradually lost momentum. Richard Cooper's name appeared nowhere in these accounts. His claim of ownership grew increasingly suspicious. Meanwhile, Richard had indeed returned with legal representation. A sharp-eyed attorney who filed formal papers demanding the dog's return and threatening legal action against Emily, Jason, and the clinic for theft of property. A court date was set for 2 weeks hence, hanging over their efforts like a dark cloud. Jason began experiencing strange moments around Max, flashes of recognition that made no logical sense, a peculiar sensation when their eyes met. He mentioned it to Emily one night as they shared a hurried dinner in the clinic break room. "It's like déjà vu," he tried to explain. Like I should know him, but that's impossible. Maybe you saw him on the news during the building collapse coverage, Emily suggested, though Jason rarely watched television news. He shook his head, frustrated by the fragments of memory that refused to coalesce into something meaningful. It's more than that. It's like, he trailed off, unable to articulate the feeling. On day 6, criticism arrived from an unexpected source. Emily's sister Claire called after seeing the local news story about their efforts to save the dogs. "Have you lost your mind?" she demanded, without preamble. "You're unemployed, trying to adopt a child, and you're spending thousands on stray dogs?" "They're not strays," Emily retorted. "They were abandoned. There's a difference." "Not to your bank account there isn't," Claire shot back. "This is exactly why the adoption agencies keep turning you down." "Impulsive decisions, Emily. Always your problem." The accusation stung, because it contained a kernel of truth, but watching Max maintain his protective vigil over Shadow, Emily couldn't bring herself to regret their decision. That night, Max's distress manifested in howls that pierced the clinic walls, deep, mournful sounds that seemed to contain all the pain he couldn't otherwise express. The next morning, Dr. Miller reported complaints from neighboring businesses, including Thompson's Pharmacy, whose owner threatened to contact animal control about the nuisance. "He needs time outdoors," Dr. Miller suggested. "Proper exercise. It would help with his anxiety." Martha, surprisingly, offered her fenced backyard. "Bring him by after your shift," she told Emily. "My garden could use some protection from those rabbits anyway." In Martha's yard that afternoon, Emily witnessed Max's first moments of seeming normality, exploring the perimeter with methodical precision, investigating scents, briefly forgetting his worries. Martha watched from her porch, pretending to read, but clearly monitoring every movement. "My Gerald always said you can tell everything important about a person by how they treat animals and waitresses," she commented when Emily joined her. "He'd say these dogs hit the lottery finding you two." "I'm not so sure," Emily admitted. "We can barely afford this. The fundraisers stalled. Richard's going to win in court." Martha snorted dismissively. "That man's not right, and anyone with eyes can see it. Something happened to those dogs in his care, and he knows it." The conversation shifted when Martha, with uncharacteristic vulnerability, pulled out a faded photograph of a young soldier with his arm around a military dog. "Gerald," she said simply, "in Vietnam." The dog was Rusty. She paused, swallowing hard. When their unit was ambushed, Rusty alerted them, saved most of the platoon. Gerald went back for him when he got hit. Neither one made it home. Emily's perception of her prickly neighbor transformed instantly. "That's why you don't like dogs." "Didn't," Martha corrected. "Seeing that one there," she nodded toward Max, who had settled watchfully under a maple tree, "reminds me too much of what they're capable of. Loyalty that most humans can't match." That evening, Max accepted food from Emily's hand again, this time maintaining eye contact as he ate. A small but significant step forward. The following day brought a shocking development. Richard Cooper appeared at the clinic, this time alone and without the aggressive demeanor. He asked to see the dogs, but made no demands. Dr. Miller, wary but professional, allowed him a brief visit to Shadow's recovery area, with Emily present. What they witnessed confused everyone. Richard approached Shadow with genuine gentleness, speaking in soft tones that the injured dog seemed to recognize. Shadow's tail, immobile since his surgery, twitched weakly in response. Even more surprising, when Max was permitted into the room, his reaction to Richard was complex. Guarded but not aggressive. Cautious but not fearful. There was a history here, more complicated than simple abuse. As Richard left, he paused at the door. "They deserve better than what happened to them," he said cryptically, then departed without elaboration. Frank arrived shortly afterward, bringing his own revelation. After Richard's initial appearance, Frank had contacted former colleagues in the canine unit. "Richard Cooper wasn't the original handler," he reported. "Michael Donovan was. Cooper was his partner. When Donovan died, suicide they say, Cooper adopted both dogs." Why wouldn't he mention that? Emily wondered. Maybe because Donovan's death wasn't as simple as they made it sound, Frank suggested. There were rumors, nothing proven. Emily's research took a new direction, leading her to concerning discoveries. Shadow's medical records, which Dr. Miller had requested from other local veterinarians, showed a pattern of injuries predating Richard's ownership. Treatments for suspicious wounds during Donovan's time as handler. Meanwhile, Jason's strange connection to Max intensified. During one visit, while Max was permitted to sit with the recovering Shadow, Jason experienced a powerful flashback, a dusty, confined space, difficulty breathing, then a wet nose nudging his face, refusing to let him sleep. He stumbled from the room disoriented. "I need to check something," he told Emily, driving immediately to the public library to access newspaper archives. There, among photographs of the West Side building survivors, he found what he was looking for, his own face, younger and partially obscured by an oxygen mask, being loaded into an ambulance. The caption identified him as Jason Williams, 35, rescued by police canine officer Max after 18 hours trapped under rubble. The accident that had left gaps in his memory, the head injury that still occasionally plagued him with migraines, had been the West Side collapse, and Max had been his rescuer. This revelation left Jason reeling. The strange connection, the inexplicable trust. Suddenly it all made sense. But why hadn't he remembered something so significant? At the clinic, new troubles emerged. Dr. Miller called an emergency meeting with Emily and Jason to deliver difficult news. "The bank denied my loan extension," she explained grimly. "Without additional funding, I'll have to close the clinic within 30 days. The implications were staggering, not just for Shadow's ongoing treatment, but for all the animals in their care. The nearest alternative facility was the emergency clinic 70 miles away, prohibitively distant for many of Oak Ridge's elderly pet owners. Martha, upon hearing this news, took action with surprising vigor. She organized her fellow seniors, many of whom had pets receiving care at Miller's clinic, into a volunteer network. Some offered transportation, others administrative help. A few with nursing backgrounds even proposed assisting with basic animal care. "We're not dead yet," Martha declared at an impromptu meeting in the clinic waiting room, "and neither is this place." Meanwhile, Richard Cooper faced his own troubles. Word of his connection to the injured dogs had spread through town, leading to vandalism at his apartment complex. Animal abuser spray-painted across his door. Threats left on his windshield. Emily, despite her suspicions about his role in the dog's condition, found herself uncomfortable with this vigilante response. When she encountered Richard at the grocery store, surrounded by whispering shoppers, she witnessed genuine fear in his eyes, not of public opinion, but something deeper. Day 11 brought a milestone. Shadow, under Dr. Miller's careful supervision, took his first shaky steps since surgery. Max's response was extraordinary. A high-pitched whine, unlike any sound they'd heard from him, his entire body quivering with what could only be described as joy. Emily recorded the moment on her phone, sharing it to the fundraising page. Donations, which had slowed to a trickle, surged briefly, though still far short of what was needed for Shadow's complete rehabilitation and the clinic's survival. A remarkable dynamic developed as Shadow improved. Max, seemingly understanding his friend was on the mend, began allowing others closer to both of them. He permitted Jason to sit nearby while he ate, accepted brief petting from Dr. Miller, and most surprisingly, developed a peculiar relationship with Martha. Each afternoon in her yard, Martha would sit with her crossword puzzle while Max patrolled. Gradually, the distance between them shortened until Max began lying at her feet while she worked. One particularly telling moment occurred when a delivery person approached Martha's gate unannounced. Max positioned himself between the stranger and Martha, alert but not aggressive, clearly appointing himself her protector. Was Martha's only comment, but Emily caught the slight smile she tried to hide. 13 days after their discovery at the train station, Emily and Jason faced the sobering reality of the upcoming court hearing. Their attorney, a young public defender named Sarah, who had volunteered her services after seeing Max's story, was honest about their chances. Richard has documentation showing legal adoption of both dogs, she explained. Without concrete evidence of abuse, the court will likely rule in his favor. But Shadow's injuries, Jason protested, could be explained many ways, Sarah interrupted gently. And Richard's demeanor with the dogs doesn't read as abusive. I'm not saying he's innocent, just that proving guilt will be extremely difficult. Emily's determination only strengthened. Then we find proof. There must be something we're missing. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived at the clinic after hours. The police chief, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes, asked to speak with Emily and Jason privately. "This isn't official," he began once they were alone, "and I could lose my pension for telling you this." He placed a thin folder on the table. Michael Donovan's internal affairs file. It was sealed after his death, but, well, let's just say I have concerns about those dogs ending up back with Cooper. Inside were complaint records, civilian reports of excessive force, departmental reprimands for aggressive handling of Max during training, and most disturbingly, photographs documenting injuries to both Donovan's wife and Richard Cooper that suggested domestic violence. Cooper was more than Donovan's partner, the chief explained reluctantly. They were involved, personally. When Cooper finally tried to leave, things got ugly. Shortly after, Donovan took his own life. The implications settled heavily in the room. Richard hadn't abused the dogs. He had been abused alongside them. "Why wouldn't Cooper tell us this?" Emily asked. "Small town," the chief replied simply. "Donovan came from a respected family here. His uncle is Judge Donovan." Jason's expression darkened. "The same Judge Donovan who's presiding over our case?" The chief's silence was answer enough. With just hours remaining before the hearing, Emily made a desperate decision. She drove to Richard's apartment, knowing the risk, but seeing no alternative. "We need to talk," she said when he answered, surprised and wary. "About Michael Donovan." Richard's face drained of color, but he stepped aside to let her in. The apartment was Spartan, but meticulously organized, nothing like the home of the unstable man she'd imagined. On the wall hung a shadow box containing a police badge, and beside it a framed photograph of Richard with both Max and Shadow, all three looking considerably healthier and happier. "You weren't the one who hurt them," Emily stated rather than asked. Richard sank into a chair, suddenly appearing much older. "No." "Then why abandon them? Why not explain?" His laugh held no humor. "You think anyone would believe me? Michael was Oak Ridge royalty. I was just the outsider who corrupted him, according to his family. When he died, they made it clear what would happen if I spoke up. But the dogs, I tried to care for them," Richard interrupted, pain evident in every word. "But they reminded me of him, of everything. Max was always his dog, more than mine. And Shadow." He swallowed hard. Shadow used to put himself between Michael and me when things got bad. Last time, Michael nearly killed him for it. Understanding dawned. "That's how Shadow was injured." Richard nodded, shame evident. "I panicked. Couldn't afford the vet bills. Couldn't face what I'd allowed to happen." His voice broke. "I convinced myself they'd be better off without me." "You were wrong," Emily said, not unkindly. "But you can make it right tomorrow. Tell the truth in court." Fear flashed across his features. "The Donovans need to be held accountable," Emily finished firmly, "just like you do for abandoning them." As she left, Richard remained seated, conflict evident in his posture. Whether he would find the courage to speak truth to power remained to be seen. That night, as Emily and Jason prepared for court, Martha appeared at the clinic with a dozen elderly residents in tow. "We'll be there," she announced. "Every last one of us. Judge Donovan needs to see who's watching." Max, sensing the tension, stayed especially close to Shadow's side that night, their forms illuminated by the soft emergency lighting of the recovery room. Two survivors waiting for morning's verdict. The Oak Ridge County Courthouse stood like a weathered sentinel at the town center, its limestone facade bearing the marks of over a century of justice, some just, some less so. On this particular morning, the building saw an unusual procession. Emily and Jason arriving with their young attorney Sarah. Martha leading a contingent of elderly residents who filled an entire row of benches. Frank in a pressed shirt that suggested the rarity of his court appearances. Dr. Miller, slipping in late, still wearing scrubs beneath her coat. Conspicuously absent were the subjects of the hearing itself. Dr. Miller had deemed Shadow too fragile for transport, and separating Max from him remained an exercise in futility no one cared to attempt. Instead, she brought comprehensive medical documentation and photographs that told their story more effectively than their physical presence might have. Judge Howard Donovan entered the courtroom with the practiced dignity of a man accustomed to deference. His resemblance to the late Michael Donovan was subtle but unmistakable. Something in the set of his jaw, the cold appraisal in his eyes as they swept over the assembled crowd. "Quite the audience for a simple property dispute," he remarked dryly, glancing pointedly at Martha's senior brigade. Richard Cooper sat alone at the plaintiff's table, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. He looked ill, his complexion ashen, his hands trembling slightly as he arranged papers before him. When his gaze briefly met Emily's, she saw neither hostility nor confidence, only profound weariness. The proceedings began with clinical efficiency. Richard's attorney presented adoption paperwork showing his legal ownership of both German Shepherds, their transfer from police department property to private ownership following Officer Michael Donovan's death. He emphasized Richard's extensive search efforts after the dogs escaped, painting a picture of a grieving man desperate to recover beloved pets. Sarah countered by calling Dr. Miller to testify about Shadow's injuries. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Miller stated firmly, "these wounds are consistent with deliberate trauma, not accident or escape attempts. The pattern suggests repeated incidents over time." "Objection," Richard's attorney interjected. "Dr. Miller cannot definitively state how these injuries occurred." "Sustained," Judge Donovan ruled immediately. "The witness will refrain from speculation." The pattern continued through subsequent testimony. Each time Sarah attempted to establish the abuse narrative, Judge Donovan found reasons to limit or dismiss the evidence. His bias, though subtle enough to avoid obvious impropriety, became increasingly apparent as the morning progressed. Martha's testimony about finding Max protecting Shadow at the train station met with skeptical questioning about her eyesight and memory at her advanced age. Frank's account of seeing Richard abandon the dogs was undermined by the revelation that the station's security cameras had indeed been non-functional, making his claim unverifiable. By mid-morning, the momentum had shifted decisively in Richard's favor. Emily squeezed Jason's hand beneath the table, both recognizing the inevitable outcome taking shape before them. "Your Honor," Richard's attorney began his closing argument, "this is fundamentally straightforward. My client legally adopted these animals. They were lost, now found. The defendants, while perhaps well-intentioned, have no legal claim whatsoever. We ask that the court order the immediate return of both dogs to their rightful owner." Sarah rose for her response, determination evident despite the case's apparent trajectory. "Your Honor, legal ownership transcends paperwork. These animals were abandoned, an act witnessed by Mr. Mitchell. They were injured, a medical fact established by Dr. Miller. They have formed bonds with my clients who have invested not just financially but emotionally in their recovery. The best interests of these animals—" "Ms. Harrington," Judge Donovan interrupted, "this court determines legal ownership, not best interests. Animals are property under the law, however much we might personally feel otherwise." His tone suggested the conclusion was foregone. Emily closed her eyes briefly, picturing Max's scarred face, Shadow's tentative steps toward recovery. The thought of returning them to the environment that had caused such suffering, even if the true abuser was gone, felt like a physical blow. "Your Honor," a new voice cut through the courtroom, "I'd like to testify." Richard Cooper had risen from his seat, ignoring his attorney's attempts to pull him back down. Judge Donovan's expression tightened. "Mr. Cooper, you're represented by counsel. If you wish to testify, your attorney should call you as a witness." "He won't," Richard replied simply, "because what I have to say isn't part of our strategy." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Donovan's gaze flicked toward the bailiff, then back to Richard. "This is highly irregular." "So is this entire proceeding," Richard countered, his voice finding strength. "I'd like to testify under oath about how those dogs were really injured, and about my relationship with your nephew Michael." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Judge Donovan's face hardened into a mask of barely controlled fury. "Mr. Cooper, approach the bench." What followed was an intense, whispered exchange, with Richard's attorney joining them, gesticulating in obvious distress. When they separated, Richard returned to his seat, but something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor. A burden lifted, a decision made. "In light of developments," Judge Donovan announced tightly, We'll take a 30-minute recess." The hallway outside buzzed with speculation as both parties conferred with their respective attorneys. Emily watched Richard across the corridor, noting how people gave him a wide berth, as though his troubles might be contagious. "What just happened in there?" she asked Sarah. "I'm not entirely sure," the young attorney admitted. "But I think Richard just threatens to air some very dirty laundry." When court reconvened, Richard was called to the witness stand and sworn in. His attorney's expression suggested this testimony was proceeding against explicit advice. "Mr. Cooper," Sarah began, seizing the unexpected opportunity, "could you please explain your relationship to Michael Donovan?" Richard sat straighter, meeting Judge Donovan's glacial stare directly. "Michael was my police partner for 3 years. He was also my domestic partner for 2. We lived together until his death last year." The courtroom stirred with this confirmation of town rumors, long whispered but rarely spoken aloud. "And the dogs? Max and Shadow?" "Max was Michael's canine partner initially. Shadow was being trained as a successor, though he never completed certification." "Did you abuse these animals, Mr. Cooper?" "No." His voice remained steady. "I did not." "Then how do you explain their injuries? Particularly Shadow's condition when found?" Richard drew a deep breath. "Michael had issues with control. When he drank, he became violent, usually toward me, sometimes toward the dogs, especially Max when he thought his performance wasn't perfect." Judge Donovan's gavel crashed down. "This testimony is irrelevant and defamatory toward a deceased officer who cannot defend himself." "Your Honor," Sarah countered quickly, "Mr. Cooper's testimony directly addresses the core issue, how these animals were injured and why he abandoned them. It is entirely relevant." After a tense moment, Judge Donovan reluctantly nodded for testimony to continue, though his expression promised consequences. Richard described a household ruled by Michael's volatile temperament, where both human and canine residents walked on eggshells. He explained how Shadow, the younger dog, would often intervene when Michael became violent, placing himself between them. "The night before I left them at the station," Richard continued, "Michael had been dead for 3 months. I was drinking, too much, too often. Shadow knocked over Michael's urn." His voice caught. "The ashes spilled. I lost control, started shouting, throwing things. Shadow got between me and Max, like he always did with Michael. I didn't hit him, but he ran, fell down the stairs. I heard something crack." The courtroom was utterly silent. "I panicked," Richard admitted, shame evident in every word. "Couldn't afford the vet bills after spending everything on Michael's funeral. Was afraid they'd euthanize him. So I left them where I knew someone would find them quickly. I told myself they'd be better off without me." "Objection," Richard's own attorney called, clearly desperate. "My client is not in the right state of mind. We request a recess to confer." "Denied," Judge Donovan snapped, visibly struggling to maintain judicial composure. "Continue, Miss Harrington." Sarah proceeded carefully. "Mr. Cooper, given everything you've shared, what outcome are you seeking from today's hearing?" Richard looked directly at Emily and Jason. "I'm withdrawing my claim. They deserve better than what either Michael or I gave them. I just wanted to make sure they were okay." The admission hung in the air, shifting the emotional current of the entire proceeding. Judge Donovan, cornered by Richard's unexpected honesty, glared from the bench. "Mr. Cooper, you filed this action. You cannot simply withdraw because testimony becomes uncomfortable." "Actually, Your Honor," Sarah interjected, "a plaintiff can move to dismiss their own claim with prejudice at any time before a ruling is issued." The legal standoff stretched for several tense moments before Judge Donovan finally spoke, each word seemingly extracted under duress. "The plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. Court adjourned." His gavel fell with finality before he swept from the courtroom, dignity barely intact. The aftermath unfolded in the courthouse corridor, where Richard found himself facing Emily and Jason. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for everything." "Why now?" Emily asked. "Why tell the truth today when you could have won?" Richard's gaze drifted toward the courthouse window, beyond which Oak Ridge spread in unremarkable small-town panorama. "Because Michael's gone, but I'm still here. So are they. We all deserve a chance to heal." As the group dispersed, Jason experienced another powerful memory surge, clearer this time. Darkness, crushing weight, the taste of dust and desperation. A wet nose nudging his face, refusing to let him surrender to the pain and exhaustion. Barking that seemed to come from another world. "I remember," he murmured, stopping abruptly on the courthouse steps. "Jason?" Emily's concern was immediate. "Remember what?" "Maximum." The building collapse. The fragments finally connected. "I was trapped for almost 18 hours. They'd called off the search, too dangerous. But Max found me. Kept me conscious until they could reach us." His voice filled with wonder. "He's saved my life, Emily, and I completely forgot him." The revelation stunned them both into momentary silence, broken only when Martha approached, leaning heavily on her cane. "Well," she prompted, "don't just stand there catching flies with your mouths open. We won! Let's go tell those dogs they're home for good." At the clinic, they found Richard had arrived before them. Through the observation window, they watched him kneeling beside Shadow's bed, Max allowing his proximity with cautious tolerance. Richard was speaking softly, one hand gently stroking Shadow's head, while the other held something small and metallic. They entered quietly, not wanting to disrupt the fragile peace of the moment. Richard looked up, eyes red-rimmed, but clearer than they'd appeared in court. "I brought something that belongs to him." He opened his palm to reveal a polished medal, Max's commendation for the West Side rescue. Michael kept it after the ceremony. Said Max didn't need a medal to know he'd done his job. He held it out to Emily, an offering and surrender in one gesture. They should have this. Their new family should have this. Jason stepped forward, the courthouse revelation still reverberating through him. "I was there, in the building collapse. Max found me when everyone else had given up." He swallowed hard. "I never got to thank him." Richard nodded, understanding dawning. "You're one of the 7. "Apparently so, though I didn't remember until today. Head injury." An unexpected connection formed between the two men, both tied to these dogs through trauma and salvation, both carrying scars visible and invisible. The moment broke when Dr. Miller entered with updates on Shadow's recovery plan. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic, though Complete rehabilitation would require months of specialized therapy. As discussions about Shadow's care continued, Martha sidled up to Emily. "Thompson's organizing a neighborhood watch program," she reported with undisguised satisfaction. "Says it's to keep an eye out for suspicious characters, but we all know it's because he feels bad about complaining about the dogs." Emily smiled, the first genuine one since the court proceedings began. "The power of guilt. The power of community," Martha corrected. "Something this town forgot it had until two mangy mutts showed up at the train station." Outside the clinic, a small crowd had gathered, well-wishers bringing dog toys, local reporters seeking follow-up interviews, curious onlookers drawn by the courthouse drama. Frank managed them with gruff efficiency, allowing only a select few inside. Among those permitted entry was the police chief, who arrived with an unexpected proposal. "The department would like to officially retire Max," he announced, "with full honors and pension benefits." He glanced at Shadow. "We'd like to extend the same courtesy to Shadow, though he never completed certification. Their medical expenses would be covered as part of their retirement package." The offer stunned everyone present. "Why would you do this?" Emily asked, suspicious of sudden generosity after weeks of institutional indifference. The chief had the grace to look embarrassed. "Let's just say today's testimony shed light on departmental oversights that should have been addressed long ago. This is a small step toward making things right." As afternoon faded toward evening, the clinic gradually emptied of visitors. Richard was the last to leave, pausing at the door with a hesitation that spoke volumes. "Will you let me visit them?" he asked, vulnerability naked in the question. "Not to claim them, just to make sure they're okay." Emily and Jason exchanged glances, a silent communication honed through years of marriage and shared dreams. "They're survivors," Emily said finally. "So are you. Maybe healing together is better than healing apart." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. That would take time, if it came at all. But it was an acknowledgement of complex truths. That people could cause harm without being monsters. That healing rarely followed straight paths. That second chances came in unexpected forms. As twilight settled over Oak Ridge, Emily and Jason remained at the clinic with their newly official family members. Shadow slept peacefully, his breathing stronger than it had been since his surgery. Max, finally convinced of their safety, had allowed Jason to sit beside him on the floor. Tentatively, Jason reached toward the scar that marked Max's face, the physical reminder of past cruelties. For the first time, Max didn't flinch away, but instead leaned slightly into the touch, a gesture so small yet so profound that Jason felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, the gratitude encompassing more than just the long-ago rescue. "For finding us. For finding me. Again." Max's steady gaze held no judgment, no lingering fear, only the simple, profound connection between two beings who had somehow found their way back to each other, across years and trauma and forgetfulness. In that quiet moment, something broken began, imperceptibly, to heal. The celebration began tentatively, as if none of them quite trusted their good fortune. Martha arrived at Emily and Jason's home with an apple pie still warm from the oven. "My Gerald's favorite," she announced, setting it on their kitchen counter with a proprietary air. Frank brought a handcrafted wooden dog bed, large enough to accommodate both Max and Shadow, though Shadow remained at the clinic under Dr. Miller's watchful care. Several of Martha's senior brigade appeared with casseroles and unsolicited advice about dog ownership, transforming the modest house into an impromptu gathering that felt suspiciously like a homecoming party. Max observed these proceedings from a careful distance, positioned to maintain sightlines to all entrances. Though the court victory had secured his future, his vigilant nature remained unchanged. A guardian temporarily without his charge, but no less committed to his duty. "He's still worried about Shadow," Emily observed quietly to Jason as they watched Max decline treats from their well-meaning guests, his attention repeatedly returning to the door. "Can't blame him," Jason replied, "after everything they've been through together." The party had begun dispersing when Max's demeanor abruptly changed. His ears pricked forward, body tensing as he rose to his feet. A low, rumbling growl emerged from deep in his chest. "What's wrong, boy?" Jason moved toward him, concerned. Before anyone could react further, Max collapsed, his powerful legs buckling beneath him as though his strings had been cut. A terrible keening sound escaped him, not a growl of warning, but a cry of pain. "Max!" Emily rushed to his side, hands hovering uncertainly over his trembling form. "Jason, something's wrong! He's burning up!" The next moments passed in panicked blur. Jason, gathering the suddenly limp German shepherd into his arms. Martha, clearing a path to the door. Frank, already on the phone to Dr. Miller. The short drive to the veterinary clinic stretched interminably, each labored breath from Max sending spikes of fear through Emily's chest. Dr. Miller met them at the clinic entrance, professional calm, belying the urgency in her movements, as she directed them to the examination room. "How long has he been showing symptoms?" she asked, hands already moving efficiently over Max's prone form. "He wasn't," Emily explained desperately. "He seemed fine, then just collapsed." The examination revealed the cruel truth. Max's stoic nature had concealed his own suffering, while everyone's attention focused on Shadow's more visible injuries. An ultrasound showed internal bleeding, old injuries aggravated by stress and his refusal to rest properly during Shadow's crisis. "He needs emergency surgery," Dr. Miller announced grimly. "Probably had internal injuries all along that weren't properly addressed because he wouldn't let anyone examine him thoroughly." "Do it," Jason said immediately, "whatever it takes." But the situation deteriorated further. The clinic's aging equipment wasn't suited for the complex procedure Max required. The nearest emergency veterinary hospital with appropriate facilities remained 70 miles away, across roads made treacherous by an unseasonable thunderstorm that had begun lashing the windows with vindictive intensity. "He might not survive the journey," Dr. Miller warned, preparing an IV drip to stabilize him, "but he certainly won't survive without intervention." The impossible decision was interrupted by Shadow's distressed whining from the recovery room. Somehow sensing his companion's crisis, he had dragged himself from his bed and was attempting to reach Max, reopening barely healed incisions in the process. "Sedate him," Dr. Miller instructed her assistant urgently, "before he undoes all our work." Emily found herself torn between the two suffering animals, her heart splintering as she tried to comfort both simultaneously. "We can't lose them now," she whispered to Jason. "Not after everything." Martha, who had followed them to the clinic, took command with unexpected authority. "Frank, call Thompson. His son has that ridiculous monster truck that can handle any weather. Mitchell twins down the street both have four-wheel drives. Anderson still has his old ambulance conversion." As Martha mobilized Oak Ridge's senior community with military precision, Jason carried Max to his truck, wrapped in clinic blankets. "I'll drive him myself," he insisted, Emily, you stay with Shadow. He needs you too. Not alone you won't, Frank countered, already climbing into the passenger seat despite his arthritic knees. I know these back roads better than GPS. The storm intensified as they pulled away from the clinic, visibility reduced to mere yards beyond the windshield. Behind them, a small convoy formed, Thompson's massive truck, the Mitchell brothers in matching jeeps, Anderson's converted ambulance, all responding to Martha's imperious summons, despite the hour and weather. Emily watched them depart with her heart in her throat, torn between the partners now physically separated for the first time since their rescue. Inside, Shadow continued fighting the sedation, somehow understanding that Max had been taken away. "It's okay," she soothed, though the words felt hollow. "Jason will get him help. They'll be back." Whether Shadow or herself needed the reassurance more remained unclear. The journey proved every bit as harrowing as feared. Roads, partially flooded from the sudden deluge, forced detours that added precious minutes to their transit time. Twice, Jason nearly lost control on slick curves, Max's labored breathing providing the only soundtrack beyond the rhythmic thump of windshield wipers, fighting a losing battle against the downpour. 5 more miles, Frank reported, peering through rain-streaked darkness at landmarks only he could identify. "Cut through Wilson's property here. It's higher ground." Max's condition deteriorated visibly with each passing minute, his powerful body now alarmingly still, except for shallow, irregular breaths. Jason found himself talking continuously, desperate to keep Max engaged. "Stay with me, buddy. Remember how you found me?" I remembered. It was dark then, too, wasn't it? You wouldn't let me give up. I'm not letting you give up either. When they finally reached the emergency veterinary hospital, Max was barely responsive. The staff rushed him inside on a gurney, medical terminology flying between them as they assessed his critical condition. Jason and Frank were relegated to a waiting room, soaked and shell-shocked, while Martha's senior brigade gradually arrived to form a somber vigil. Back in Oak Ridge, Emily maintained her own vigil beside Shadow, who had finally succumbed to sedation but remained restless even in sleep. Dr. Miller checked on them periodically, her professional optimism wearing thin as hours passed without updates from the emergency hospital. "He's a fighter," Emily insisted, when the silence became unbearable. "They both are." "Yes," Dr. Miller agreed softly. "But sometimes even fighters need miracles." Near midnight, the emergency hospital doors slid open to admit an unexpected arrival. Richard Cooper, accompanied by a uniformed police officer. Jason rose instinctively, defensive despite his exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Richard raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I heard what happened. I brought something that might help." He nodded to his police escort who stepped forward. "Officer Davis has the same blood type as Max," Richard explained. "The emergency blood bank is short on canine supplies. He's here to donate for the transfusion Max needs." The gesture, so unexpected, so desperately needed, momentarily robbed Jason of speech. "How did you know?" "Martha called me," Richard admitted. "Said she was calling everyone who might help and, well, she's not someone you say no to." Shortly after the transfusion began, the head veterinary surgeon emerged with guarded news. Max had survived the initial surgery but remained critical. The next 24 hours would determine everything. "He flatlined once during the procedure," the surgeon explained gently. "We got him back, but his system is severely compromised. I have to be honest, his chances aren't good." The words fell like physical blows. After everything, the rescue, the court battle, the community's rallying support, to lose Max now seemed a cruelty beyond bearing. Jason found himself unable to respond, grief closing his throat. Frank's weathered hand gripped his shoulder. Max pulled 7 people from that collapsed building when everyone said it couldn't be done, he reminded Jason. Don't count him out yet. In the recovery room, Emily sat beside Shadow's bed, phone pressed to her ear as Jason relayed the devastating update. Shadow whimpered, as if understanding every word, straining against his bandages despite the sedatives. He can sense it, Emily realized aloud. He knows Max is in trouble. Dr. Miller, overhearing, paused in the doorway. The bond between them is extraordinary, she acknowledged, unlike anything I've seen in 30 years of practice. As dawn approached, Martha organized a rotation of visitors to maintain the vigil at both locations, refusing to allow either dog to be alone for even a moment. The storm gradually subsided, leaving behind a washed-out landscape of puddles and debris that matched the emotional exhaustion gripping them all. Emily, finally persuaded to rest briefly on the clinic's break-room couch, jerked awake to the sound of Shadow's howling, a mournful, primal sound that chilled her blood. Racing to his side, she found him fully alert, head raised, giving voice to a grief so profound it transcended species. In that terrible moment, she knew without being told that somewhere 70 miles away, Max's brave heart had stopped beating. Shadow's mournful howl echoed through the clinic, a sound so primal and heartbreaking that Dr. Miller dropped the chart she was holding. Emily cradled the grieving shepherd's head, her own tears falling freely as she tried to comfort him, knowing instinctively what his cry signified. Her phone rang seconds later. Jason's voice came through, broken and raw. "He's gone, Emily. Max just... his heart stopped again, and he couldn't continue." But then she heard commotion in the background, urgent voices calling for equipment, a flurry of activity conveyed through the phone's tinny speaker. "Jason, what's happening?" "I don't know. They're rushing back in. I have to go." The line went dead, leaving Emily suspended between devastation and a fragile newborn hope. Shadow had gone quiet, his ears pricked forward as if listening to something beyond human perception. 30 agonizing minutes passed before Jason called again, his voice transformed. "It's a miracle, Em. They don't understand it. He was clinically dead for almost 2 minutes. Then his heart just started again, on its own." The emergency veterinarian took the phone to explain the inexplicable. "We were preparing to call time of death when his cardiac monitor picked up a rhythm. It's extremely unusual, especially given the duration of arrest. We're cautiously optimistic, but he's not out of danger. The next 12 hours are critical." As Emily relayed this information to Dr. Miller, Shadow visibly relaxed, laying his head back down as though some silent communication had reassured him. "I've seen animals sense things beyond our understanding," Dr. Miller observed. "But this..." She shook her head, medical training warring with what she'd just witnessed. By mid-morning, the emergency hospital reported Max stable enough for Jason and Frank to briefly visit his recovery room. Jason sent Emily a photo. Max connected to multiple machines, but alive, his eyes open and alert, even in his weakened state. "The staff is calling him Miracle Max," Jason texted. "Appropriate for so many reasons." While Max fought for recovery at the emergency hospital, Richard Cooper appeared at the clinic, hesitant but determined. His face showed evidence of sleepless nights, but his eyes held a clarity that had been missing during their previous encounters. "I'd like to explain," he began when Emily met him in the waiting room. "About everything, if you're willing to hear it." Over coffee in the clinic's break room, Richard revealed the full, painful history that had led to the dog's abandonment. His relationship with Michael Donovan had begun with genuine love, he explained, but gradually evolved into something darker. Michael was respected in the department, from a powerful local family. I was new in town, no connections. When things started changing, his jealousy, the controlling behavior, I told myself it was stress, that it would pass. The abuse had escalated gradually. First emotional manipulation, then physical intimidation, finally outright violence, a pattern depressingly familiar to anyone who worked with domestic abuse victims. Max was his police partner first, but Michael used him as another control mechanism. If I didn't behave exactly as Michael wanted, he'd punish Max. Miss meals, harsh training, sometimes worse. Shadow had entered their household as a puppy intended for canine training. From the beginning, Shadow was different, more sensitive, more attuned to emotional undercurrents. He started intervening when Michael would get violent, physically placing himself between us. Richard's voice broke. Michael hated that, said I was turning his dogs against him. The night before his suicide, he beat Shadow so severely I thought he'd killed him. When I tried to get the puppy to a vet, Michael threatened to claim I had abused his police dog, a career-ending accusation. The next morning, Michael had taken his service weapon and ended his life in their shared home. Richard found him, along with a note that blamed Richard for destroying everything. His family closed ranks immediately. The department ruled it death in the line of duty, despite the evidence. His uncle, the judge, made it clear I was to maintain the fiction or face consequences. I was left with funeral expenses, traumatized dogs, and my own unaddressed PTSD. For months, Richard had tried to care for Max and Shadow, but the dog's presence constantly triggered traumatic memories. His own mental health deteriorated, leading to drinking and emotional instability. That final night, when Shadow knocked over Michael's urn, Richard couldn't continue for a moment. I became the monster I'd lived in fear of. Not physically violent, but the rage in me. Shadow recognized it. He intervened like he always did, got hurt trying to protect Max from me. The decision to leave them at the train station had been born of desperation and shame. I told myself someone would find them quickly, get Shadow proper care, that they deserved better than what I could give them. His eyes met Emily's directly. I was right about that last part, at least. Emily absorbed this painful history in silence. The anger she'd harbored toward Richard transformed into something more complex. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "It can't have been easy." "Nothing about this has been easy," Richard acknowledged. "But after the hearing, I'm trying to face things honestly now. Starting therapy, staying sober. One day at a time, as they say." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Miller, who arrived with surprising news. "The police chief just called. In light of circumstances, the department is officially declaring both Max and Shadow retired canine officers with full benefits, including complete medical coverage." Emily's relief was palpable. The financial burden that had been crushing them suddenly lifted. "Why the change of heart?" "Apparently," Dr. Miller replied with a hint of satisfaction, "Judge Donovan's handling of your case has prompted some uncomfortable questions about the department's oversight of canine welfare under Michael's supervision. They're eager to demonstrate proper care now." Richard's expression suggested this development wasn't entirely surprising. Michael's family has always been concerned with appearances. They'll do the right thing publicly, now that private suppression has failed. As days passed, Max's condition improved steadily, defying medical expectations. The emergency hospital staff noted his determination with admiration, particularly his insistence on attempting to stand just days after surgery. "He wants to come home," Jason told Emily during their daily phone updates. "To Shadow. To us." Shadow's recovery progressed equally well, his movements becoming stronger and more coordinated with each physical therapy session. Dr. Miller observed that his motivation seemed directly tied to updates about Max, each report of improvement fueling his own determination. "They're healing for each other," she remarked. "It's quite extraordinary from a medical perspective." A week after Max's near-death experience, he was deemed stable enough for transport back to Oak Ridge. The journey home became an impromptu parade, with Martha once again marshalling her senior brigade to provide escort. Thompson's massive truck led the way, festooned with hand-painted "Welcome Home Max" signs created by local schoolchildren. Emily waited anxiously at the clinic with Shadow, who seemed to sense the approaching reunion. For the first time since his own injury, he managed to stand unassisted, trembling with effort and anticipation. The moment Max was wheeled into the clinic, wrapped in blankets on a special stretcher, Shadow let out a soft whine of recognition. Max's ears immediately pricked forward, his tail thumping weakly against the stretcher. Dr. Miller, normally strict about recovery protocols, took one look at their straining bodies and relented. "Just for a few minutes," she conceded, helping to position Max's stretcher alongside Shadow's bed. The reunion reduced everyone present to tears. Max, still weak from his ordeal, nonetheless managed to lift his head enough to rest it against Shadow's neck. Shadow, in turn, gently licked Max's face, focusing particular attention on the scar that marked his muzzle. "It's like they're checking each other for damage," Frank observed gruffly, his own voice suspiciously thick. "Making sure the other one's really okay," Martha agreed, not bothering to hide her tears. "Been doing it since the beginning, I'd wager." In the following days, their recovery accelerated, a phenomenon Dr. Miller documented carefully for veterinary journals. The dogs were permitted brief periods together under supervision, their presence clearly beneficial to each other's healing process. 2 weeks after Max's return to Oak Ridge, Richard visited the clinic, bringing something special: Max's Medal of Valor, rescued from Michael's possessions. "This belongs with him now," Richard said, placing the medal in Emily's hands. "With his real family." Jason, who had finally pieced together his complete memories of the West Side collapse, regarded Richard thoughtfully. "I never thanked him properly for saving my life that day." "Max just did what came naturally," Richard replied, "finding people who needed saving." The observation lingered as they watched the two shepherds resting peacefully together, healing gradually in body and spirit. "Isn't that what we all did?" Emily reflected. "Found each other when we needed saving the most?" As if understanding her words, Max lifted his head and met her gaze with the same profound connection she'd felt that first day at the train station. A silent recognition between two souls who had learned, against all odds, to trust again. Martha, observing this exchange, nodded with satisfaction. Gerald always said dogs do the work angels can't manage themselves. Too busy with bigger matters, I suppose." She reached out tentatively to touch Max's ear. "Though I can't imagine what could be more important than saving a heart that's given up hope." 1 month later, Oak Ridge basked in the golden light of early autumn. The maple tree in Martha's backyard cast dappled shadows across her meticulously maintained lawn, where Max now patrolled with measured dignity. His gait still carried a slight hitch, a permanent reminder of his brush with death, but his eyes were clear and alert, surveying his domain with the quiet confidence of a warrior who had earned his rest. Shadow lounged nearby on a cushioned outdoor bed, his rehabilitation further along than anyone had dared hope. Though he would likely always favor his right side, his youthful resilience had confounded Dr. Miller's cautious prognosis. Twice-weekly physical therapy sessions, which Emily now assisted with as part of her veterinary assistant training, had restored much of his mobility. "They clean up nice," Martha observed from her porch rocker, watching the shepherds enjoy the afternoon sunshine. At 78, she had appointed herself unofficial grandmother to both dogs, hosting what she called seniors and shepherds gatherings every Thursday afternoon. What had begun as a small gathering of her elderly friends had evolved into a community fixture, with attendance growing weekly. "The Thompson boy brought his autistic daughter last week," Martha informed Emily, who had stopped by after her shift at Dr. Miller's clinic. "Dog wouldn't leave the child's side. Girl spoke 3 whole sentences, first time in months, according to her father." Emily smiled, unsurprised. Shadow had demonstrated a remarkable sensitivity to emotional needs, particularly with children. What had begun as casual visits to Martha's backyard had evolved into something more structured. Informal therapy sessions that brought together Oak Ridge's isolated seniors and troubled youth. "Dr. Miller thinks Shadow could be certified as a therapy dog," Emily said, accepting the lemonade Martha offered. "His temperament is perfect for it." "And Max?" Martha inquired, though she already knew the answer. "Too protective for formal certification. But he keeps Shadow feeling secure, which makes everything possible." Emily watched as Max positioned himself between Shadow and the street, an instinctive guardian even in this peaceful setting. The changes extended beyond the dogs. Emily had enrolled in a veterinary assistant program, attending evening classes 3 times weekly while working part-time at Dr. Miller's clinic. The police department's decision to cover Max and Shadow's medical expenses as retired canine officers had relieved their immediate financial pressure, allowing Emily to pursue the career path she had abandoned years earlier. Dr. Miller's clinic itself had undergone a transformation. The police department, eager to repair its public image after the revelations about Michael Donovan's behavior, had provided funding for a specialized canine rehabilitation wing. What had been a struggling small-town veterinary practice now attracted clients from neighboring counties, with Dr. Miller hiring additional staff to meet demand. Jason had received a promotion to construction foreman after his boss witnessed his unwavering dedication throughout the crisis. Despite working longer hours, he appeared more energized than he had in years, the restoration of his complete memories providing closure to questions that had lingered since the West Side collapse. Frank Mitchell had found renewed purpose as well. The former canine trainer now volunteered at the clinic, helping socialize rescued dogs and sharing his expertise with a new generation. His gruff exterior remained, but those who knew him noticed a newfound lightness in his step. Richard Cooper's transformation proved perhaps the most profound. Continuing with therapy and maintaining his sobriety, he had begun volunteering at a domestic violence shelter in the next town over, sharing his story with others trapped in abusive relationships. Though his visits with Max and Shadow remained somewhat tentative, each interaction grew less burdened by the ghosts of their shared past. That afternoon, as Martha's senior friends began arriving for their weekly gathering, Emily received a text from Jason. "Big news, tell you tonight." Her curiosity had to wait, as Shadow had already assumed his unofficial therapy duties, greeting each elderly visitor with gentle attentiveness, seeming to intuitively understand which ones needed his special focus. Max maintained a watchful distance, occasionally accepting brief petting from Martha, but primarily focused on monitoring his surroundings. "That dog still thinks he's on duty," Frank commented, lowering himself carefully onto a lawn chair. "Some habits don't break." "Some shouldn't," Martha replied, watching Max guide an overly enthusiastic child away from Shadow's still sensitive hindquarters. "World needs more who take their responsibilities seriously." When Emily finally arrived home that evening, she found Jason waiting with a bottle of champagne and an uncharacteristically nervous expression. "What's the big news?" she asked, setting down her bag as Max and Shadow greeted her with their customary enthusiasm. Shadow with full body wiggling, Max with dignified restraint until she acknowledged him properly. "Two things, actually," Jason began, pouring champagne into mismatched glasses. "First, Thompson's son, the contractor I've been working with on the Miller Clinic expansion, he offered me a full partnership in his company." Emily's delighted congratulations were interrupted by Max nudging her hand insistently, his way of demanding she complete their greeting ritual by scratching behind his ears. "That's wonderful," she exclaimed, automatically complying with Max's request. "What's the second thing?" Jason took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about the adoption applications, how they keep falling through." Emily's expression sobered. Their last rejection had come just before finding Max and Shadow, another closed door in their quest to become parents. "I think," Jason continued carefully, "maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. Maybe our family was meant to come together differently." He guided her to the small room they had designated as a potential nursery, unchanged since their last disappointing agency interview. The door now bore a simple, hand-painted sign, "Study." Inside, the crib and changing table had been replaced with a desk, bookshelves, and a comfortable reading chair. On the desk sat an acceptance letter from the regional college's veterinary technician program, the full degree Emily had abandoned years ago when finances forced her to choose a more practical teaching career. "Jason," she whispered, recognizing the sacrifice and support the gesture represented. "We've found our purpose," he said simply, watching as Max and Shadow settled themselves naturally on either side of Emily, the four of them forming a tableau that somehow looked exactly right. "This is our family." Outside the window, Martha could be seen in her garden, deadheading roses with methodical precision. Frank was walking up her driveway with a casserole dish, another unacknowledged dinner delivery for the widow who would never admit to appreciating the company. In the quiet study, surrounded by the family that had found her rather than the one she had desperately sought, Emily felt the last piece of a long, unsolved puzzle finally slide into place. Shadow leaned against her leg, while Max sat at perfect attention. Guardians, companions, healers in ways no human could fully comprehend. "Yes," she agreed, heart full. "This is exactly the family we were meant to have." Sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive when we've stopped looking for them. Emily and Jason's journey reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood or paperwork. Sometimes it walks in on four paws, when we least expect it. Max and Shadow, abandoned and broken, found healing in the same hearts they were destined to mend. Martha discovered that opening her garden gate could also unlock her closed-off heart. Frank realized his wisdom still held value in a world he thought had moved on without him. Even Richard found redemption through honesty and amends. Their story teaches us that it's never too late for second chances, that healing happens in community, and that purpose often finds us when we're busy making other plans. The train station where two dogs waited became the crossroads where multiple lives changed direction, proving that our golden years can still hold golden opportunities for connection, meaning, and unconditional love. Has an unexpected encounter ever changed the direction of your life? Who has been the Max in your story, the loyal presence who refused to let you give up when times were darkest? Share your stories in the comments below.